would have been our own sovereignty in terms of having now to go to multilateral institutions to seek financial assistance to be able to implement our programs. And what they would do, they would then decide not only that we need to tighten our belt, but by how much we need to do so. They would decide what type of diet they must put us into and how aggressive that diet should be. They would make all the major decisions that ultimately would affect our sovereignty as a country. We have made choices. A choice to continue implementing our programs ourselves in a manner we choose. No matter how difficult the immediate choices are, but we know that the future, therefore, will be much better. And that's why we said it's a tough budget, but it brings out hope. It raises the hope that not only through the consolidation measures we announced, but mainly through the structural reform programs that we spoke about, which were raised by the President in the State of the Nation address, we are able to stabilize the debt, balance the books, as we focus on growing the economy. We are fully convinced that the interventions on mining, telecommunications, SOC reforms, financial sector reforms, procurement policy reforms, and a variety of other measures are going to bring about a boost in business confidence and consumer confidence that will have a positive impact on the economy, help us to boost growth, generate more revenues, to alleviate the pressure and the pain that we have to suffer in the immediate term. But such is the responsibility of building a nation. It requires at all times that you make difficult choices, and the responsibility of leadership is to make those difficult choices, to bear the criticism, to bear the challenges, and be able to continue pointing the way forward, to see beyond what the naked eye can see. And that is what we have tried to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Deputy Minister, you will come in when there's questions. DG, take us through your presentation.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairs. You know, the Minister basically summarized my slides, you know, so I don't know where to start.
That's progressive.
Yes, but I'm also told that we have got a challenge with the electronics, so, but I guess our members have got the presentations with them. I think as Minister said and indicated that 2017 in particular was a very difficult year for the fiscals and for the economy as a whole. We, you know, the year in it had challenges, and you know, with the revenue numbers depicting exactly what the challenges we experienced is a good sign that 2017 was not a good year for us. Now, as we approach this budget, you know, as we approach the MTBPS and we presented to you, we kind of went into detail at the MTBPS as to what those challenges are. And we're able to explain and say, if there are certain things that we don't do, this is how economy was going to be at, and it's going to be difficult for us to even begin to talk about growth that will actually make it easy for tax revenues to flow and obviously make it almost impossible for service delivery to happen in the way that we had indicated. So approaching this budget, we approach it with a renewed sense of optimism, as we've said, and not only created by the prospects, good prospects, but clearly by the economic confidence that we saw and return to sustainable public finance that we saw as we are building the budget, And as this indicators were showing, especially from around October, November, December, January. So it is that sense of optimism that made us approach this budget that we presented in the manner that we did. And notwithstanding the challenges that we highlighted in 2017 during the MTBPS. Now, this budget that you're presenting accelerates government efforts to narrow the budget deficit and stabilize growth. We had a situation in 2018 that we presented, 2017, where debt to GDP was hitting 60.8%, and that was unsustainable by any measure. And we were worried. Rating agencies downgraded us. Moody's gave us a 90-day review, and that was in a context when we don't do anything. We then had to do something about it. As we were trying to understand what hit us at the time, we also had a high bill in the higher education, a fee-free call that we had to address and actually make provision for. So call it a double whammy. On one hand, you've got tax revenues that are not performing. On the second hand, you've got an economy that's not growing. 3, you've got debt to GDP that's hitting the mark, unsustainable marks, increasing to way beyond 60% of GDP. And 4, you've got a 57 billion rand bill that you have to address. And all of these things have to be addressed, and it's January, and you have to address those. So we did not have a choice, Chair. But one, we had to look at 40 billion rand worth of measures that we announced even before the budget. When the President, and we were on record to say that as we approach the budget, we will have to exercise 40 billion rand worth of measures. 15 billion from tax measures, and 25 billion from expenditure cuts on measures that we had to work around. So this is what we started working around to address this double whammy that I was talking about. Coming into the budget, the total number was therefore 36 billion. Why 36 billion? In February last year, we had indicated that there will be a new 15 billion rand that kicks in this financial year. So we had to make provision for that. And it was mainly through, obviously, VAT, as we all know now that we increased VAT by 1% from 14 to 15. And we also made some minor adjustments below inflation to personal income tax brackets, and we can talk more about that later. We've also revised the expenditure ceiling down marginally over the next 3 years by almost 85 billion. Yes. The expenditure ceiling is revised down marginally over the next 3 years compared to, which is important, compared to what we said during the medium-term budget policy statement in October. Now, together with an improved growth outlook, the revenue measures and spending measures reduce the consolidated deficit, which is important. And it's a story that got us into trouble with rating agencies, that we were at 4.3% of GDP in terms of the numbers that we're talking about. But we were happy yesterday to announce that by 2021, this deficit will hit 3.5%, reducing from what it was in the projections that we made during the MTBPS. And also what is important is that the primary deficit is closing, which helps us to stabilize debt at 56.2%. Now, your debt sustainability and our ability to service debt is measured by your primary balance. If your primary balance eases towards being positive, then we all have to smile. But in October, that's not what we said. It was very high. So we are comfortable that our primary balance currently is 0.2 and easing on to 0.1 towards the end of this MTF period. Now, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here in terms of what informs the basis for our analysis that global recovery provides a supportive environment for us, in particular South Africa, to grow, and for the opportunities are there. As we indicated yesterday, that the world economy continues to strengthen, supported by tax reform in the US, strong domestic demand and trade in Europe, and accommodative monetary policy in developed countries. So I'm not going to go into too much detail in explaining what this means for us. It's all in front of us. We are also excited that we've seen commodity prices beginning to recover, which I think we have to take advantage of, because as you know, we are a mineral resource-rich country. So every time there's commodity prices that are recovering, our sectors, including gold, platinum, iron ore, coal, and crude oil, should take advantage thereof. The domestic outlook has improved since the 2017 MTBS, as I said. Now you can see in terms of real GDP growth. What is growth? What we said was that we see real GDP growth increasing to 1.5% in 2018 through to 2.1% in 2020, and we think that's a good story, and mainly it's benefiting from strong growth in agriculture, high commodity prices, as I said, and now recently, in recent months, in a few months, 2 months, in the last 2 months, an improved investor sentiment, which is quite important for us looking and moving forward. Now, we're also indicating that the medium-term growth outlook has improved marginally from what we said in the MTBPS, due to an expected increase in private investment as a result of improved confidence. Now, the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry Business Confidence Index reached its highest, and this is good news, since 2015, and while ABSA PMI Purchase Managers Index is at its highest level since January 2010. And I think it's important that those two indicators clearly shows you that there's something good that we began doing. There's something good that's actually we should be noting as we approach our countries, looking at our country's finances from now onward, moving forward. Now, we've made substantial progress in implementing short-term confidence boosting measures that we came back to, that we came to you and we explained what those 14 confidence boosting measures are. Some of them were around state-owned company reform, including the appointment of both boards at both SAA and ESCOM, which we did. And we saw through just these two appointments that if you put the right managers in place with the right attitude and the right boards, or if you address broadly governance issues, as we constantly said through to you, that we are able to see the green shoots that I've been talking about. Now, in ESCOM, for instance, we know lenders and the investor community was not interested anymore in terms of participating in ESCOM bonds or even lending operations in ESCOM. Clearly because you had a situation where almost everyone in ESCOM was acting, from your chief legal officer, from your procurement, from your chair of the board, CEO, CFO, etc., including the board that they had issues with. So by just making those changes, we saw business confidence shooting up at high levels, including what we saw, and these two committees will know exactly what I mean when I talk about SAA, because this is an issue that we spent a lot of time last year dealing with. And we saw with the appointment of a credible board, the appointment of a CEO, the appointment of a chief restructuring officer, we are able to see some turnaround here and there, of which the challenges are still remaining, but you are able to see some green shoots in these two entities in particular. So we think much more needs to be done in addressing some of these challenges. Now, there's no way. We have to translate this into more rapid economic growth that we can take advantage of in terms of finalizing all other outstanding policy and administrative reforms that we need to do. And I'm not going to go into details. Minister did talk about these structural reforms that he was talking about. We have to punt for mining sector policies that support development. There's no other way, investments and transformation. We have to address the issues about spectrum release, etc., and that we've said that, and address all other barriers that talks to uncompetitive, anti-competitive practices, including the labor reforms that Minister spoke about. Now, slide 7. Despite all of these, revenue shortfalls remain significant. 48.2 billion is a big A number, but we think we will be able to turn that around once we, obviously, we get certain fundamentals right. And some of the fundamentals are indicated in the previous slide. Now, we know that the fee-free higher education came with a bill of 57 billion. We had to find 57 billion, and I explained how we found the money by a combination of revenue measures and expenditure reductions and measures to try and address essentially what is an important intervention that government made to address a call on ensuring that free education happens for the poor and the vulnerable. Now, in terms of the budget summary of the budget proposals that we made yesterday, one is that we raise an additional 36 billion in tax revenues. That includes increase in VAT and adjustments in PIT brackets, including expenditure adjustments, as I said, baseline reductions from, reduce MTF's baseline reductions by almost 26 billion.
It's now on page 8. You can just
Sorry, slide 8. Allocate 2014 12.4 billion for free higher education and training in the first year, which we did. We've also set aside an additional 5 billion for the contingency reserve. Now, during the MTBPS, you'll remember that we raided the contingency reserve. We reduced them to unacceptable levels. So what this budget does is basically trying to bring back those levels and then actually claw back and make sure that we address any contingencies that may happen in case they happen, and we have got some basis to work. We are putting 8, 8, 10 over the 3 years in terms of new numbers that we are putting together. There's another allocation, provisional allocation of 6 billion for drought management and public infrastructure. Now, the 6 billion, we recognize the drought, the challenges in all the provinces facing drought. And we think it's important that we actually say, so that it is not a big deal when we have to rectify this during the MTBPS or the adjustments budget, sorry. And we're also saying we have cut some infrastructure projects which we're not spending, of which there was slow spending. We have introduced something called the Budget Facility for Infrastructure, which is basically an appraisal. We want to, by the time projects are funded, or large infrastructure projects are funded, we want to be comfortable that we have ticked all the right boxes. There was a call that you made for projects, for departments to submit projects by the 31st of August. They did that. We looked at the number, and budget documentation indicates that. And we are saying, of all those projects, some of them are good to go, some of them needs to be tweaked here and there. But we're saying for some of those public infrastructure projects, there's a provisional allocation of 6 billion that also can address it, including obviously addressing interventions that we need to be making, as Minister indicated, in allocations towards the NPA, in allocations towards the State Capture Commission, etc. So we have that provision made, and that 6 billion rand obviously can be made towards that. So, Chair, the baseline spending reductions and tax measures fit through to the outer years, as I explained, of the framework, while allocations to higher increase sharply. I mean, the higher education allocations increase sharply, and they'll continue. They are the fastest growing item in the expenditure, and this has been an ongoing case since the previous few years when we zero fees increase, or freeze on fees at universities was introduced at the time when the movement started. Now, as I indicated, we are listing those, the breakdown of the 36 billion rand in terms of tax revenues that I was mentioning, and we are making various allocations and reallocations there. Now, with that, I thought we should bring the slide 10, just so that we get a little bit deeper, and we can obviously talk more about that later on, in terms of what we are saying here. I think, in fact, what we are putting, and the fact that we are putting through to you and to others is that VAT will have the least harmful impact on growth. And this is based on the modeling that we've done. And it's based on the evidence that's available at our disposal. And we know it's an efficient tax provided that it is designed and is kept simple and will have at least the least detrimental effect on growth and employment. At 14%, the current VAT rate is lower than the global and African average. African meaning in African countries. Now, we've got a slide there that shows where we are compared to our peers in other countries, OECD countries, including some countries in Africa, and obviously some countries in our category, emerging economies. So I'm not going to, one can see that, and with PIT, it has increased repeatedly in the recent years, and we thought now is the main contributor to revenue shortfall. So we think if we rated more PIT like we did, it will have negative impact in terms of what exactly we're talking about. And by the way, with the 50 billion rand, 51 billion rand number that we gave to you in October, 20 billion rand of that number was as a result of PIT. Now imagine if you're under collecting on PIT and you go deeper into PIT and try and get more, we would not have met the fiscal framework in the way that we did. So that's why again we thought VAT would be the option. Corporate income tax rate and CIT ratio to GDP is high by any standard, by international standards. So again, we had to make some considerations whether to increase CIT or not, but we then arrived at a point that we wouldn't want it to be detrimental to the cost and the economy. Now, there are additional measures that we've put in place to enhance progressivity of the tax system. VAT proposals increase the cost of living for all households. We know that. The wealthiest 30% of households contribute about 85% of VAT revenue. That's what our modeling says. That really the impact obviously will be on the wealthiest, who obviously contribute almost 85% of VAT revenue. But however, we also acknowledge that poor people will be affected, and that we obviously have to partially mitigate the impact through zero rating of basic foodstuff in items like, including paraffin and other food items. We also want Chair.
Order, order. You are protected. Some places in the rural areas, they still have paraffin. Come with me. I'll show you.
The problem is Tandi's from Europe, okay? So she don't understand.
Honourable members, let's stay focused and listen to the DG's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Now, the impact on the poor will also be partially mitigated by above inflation increases in social grant. Now, we know it's not every South African who's on a social grant, but the poorest of the poor also participate, I'm in that category. And we think by giving above inflation increase in social grant will actually mitigate the impact and the blow that this comes with. And also to strengthen the progressivity of the tax system, we're also proposing that there should be no adjustment to the top four personal income tax brackets. We also increase ad valorem excise duties. That ensures that households spending more on luxury goods contribute proportionally more, and a higher estate duty rate for obviously people who are wealthy. Now, in terms of the baseline reductions by sphere, we're indicating in the slide 12 as to the impact, as to where the 86 billion rand comes from. But as I mentioned, I think it's also important to note that in most of these cases, we're able to target those programs and projects that are underperforming. We targeted administration programs where there was a cream of almost 2% across. So the impact of the reductions is not the end story insofar as we are concerned. We are saying departments, provinces, municipalities should ensure that they squeeze efficiency gains that the system that we can extract from the system. We still believe there are projects where our government is charged way above what the actual cost is. We still believe that more than 700% profits are even being made in some of the services that we are being charged as government. And we think it is important that government officials and departments and provinces, municipalities and national government should actually ensure that with these reductions, that service delivery is not impacted and that we are able to squeeze more and actually stretch the rent, because in the short term, that should be the only way. Instead of, as a family household, as an example, Chair, you'll say you need a car, because a car is essentially takes you from point A to point B. But a cheap car which is costing 100,000 can be bought instead of a Maserati or a Bentley that's costing 2 million. So we know that some of my colleagues and some of our colleagues spend like we're spending on Maseratis when we should actually be spending like a small cheap car that could be worth much less than 100,000 rand. So all I'm saying is that it's a call that we're making, that you've got baseline reductions of 86 billion. You have challenges of maintaining service delivery at certain levels. How do you do that, and how do you balance that in the short term? So it's a call that we're making, that colleagues should actually ensure that those tenders are properly adjudicated, that it's not only about being cheap, it's also being about reasonable. You can be cheap and still charge a bottle of water 20 rands, and when all the others are charging 50 rands. But when you go to Pick and Pay, it's 1.99 rand. So we have to find ways in the system with all the laws and the PFMA and the regulations that we, by the way, are responsible for, to make it easy for this chief procurement officer in a department or an accounting officer to go to Pick and Pay and buy water for 1.99 instead of having used 3 quotations when the cheapest is 20 rands, but you know very well that you can get it for 1.99 at a store. So I think it is important that we in an open mind, approach implementation of the 2018 budget. And with all the flexibilities that's in the system, we have to exercise those, including in the authority that we have as Treasury to grant certain deviations where necessary. And in our documentation, Chair, we're saying we will revisit the deviation policy frameworks, because departments and entities are using that to circumvent the procurement system that should be transparent, open, and fair. In the same sentence, I'm saying, therefore, we should be flexible for us to get to that 1.99 rand bottle of water instead of the basic minimum cheap, which was 20 rand, based on 3 quotations where 20 was cheap, 40 was cheaper, 50 rand was more expensive. So we have, over the years, marginally revised expenditure ceiling down, and again, we did that in this budget, whereby by just reducing budgets. In 2017-18, and we are being honest and upfront through to you, because it's important that we do that. We can hide 2.9 billion, it's easy to hide 2.9 billion in a budget of 1.4 trillion. And we say, no, we won't breach the ceiling. Even if we breach it by a rand or 2.9 billion almost here, in this case, it should be important and actually note it. But we hope, we still have a month to go. The numbers are still coming through. We want to believe that in a budget of about 1.4 trillion, we should find a way that we remain within the ceiling without even having exercised some of the options that we had at the time. Now, slide 14 is a very, we've improved it slightly. Sorry, slide 15. We've improved slide 15 slightly. I've been saying, every time this slide comes, we say, we used to be rich, we used to be fine, we used to have money. In 2006, look at the revenue, the black line. In 2006, 2007 financial year, our revenue was around 26% of GDP. We had money, and we were spending far way below that. What did we do? We took policy choices, government, as a state. We started ramping up non-interest spending because we needed to do certain basic things those years. When 2009 happened, we dropped. We dropped in terms of collection, revenue collection. We could not drop spending. We had to maintain and spending levels at a very high level. But again, it's important that those lines, the black line must be above the red line. That's all we are saying, through to you. When the red line meets the black line, it is when we have properly assessed as to what exactly should government do in improving the lives of the poor. And that's important. So I thought I must spend a little bit more time in this slide to just explain what it means and how it means. So therefore, the main budget revenue grows from around 25.4% of GDP in the current year to 26.6%. It is good news. Main budget non-interest spending remains stable at around 26% of GDP, as we've explained in detail. My favorite slide, Chair, is slide 16. We buried our head in the sand in the way we are viewed in October when we presented the black line. And that's the line I was talking about earlier on. Because we were benchmarking ourselves against what we said in the 2017 budget this time last year. And that's the gray line. But in between, we had challenges. And we had to come out in a way that we came out at, to balance service delivery, to acknowledge that the economy is not doing well, to acknowledge that there's new pressures, to acknowledge that we've got a looming downgrade on us which can have detrimental effect. In fact, at this point, Minister, I must just mention that we had 3 calls already with all 3 main rating agencies in the last day. Fitch, we spoke to Fitch today. Yesterday, S&P and Moody's, we are with them. Fitch will, maybe in the short term, just preliminary have their views. But what we gather in this, we do it every year after budget, when everyone is hugging each other and everyone is having cocktail, the Treasury officials lock themselves in an office. We focus. We have 2 hours with each of the rating agencies until around 6 p.m. because we think that's important. As much as, some colleagues are taking nice photos at the, so in our case, we engaged with Fitch and Moody's and S&P. The preliminary view is that we did well. The preliminary view is that there's no big things that they are questioning in our views. It's things on the margins, and they understand, but they understand that out of a tough environment, we came out better than we came out in October. And that's something that I think the committee and everyone listening should know, that the preliminary view is that we are far much better in their eyes from where we were in October. And the red line clearly depicts that. Because it's the red line that we should be worried about. Because that red line is the one that will indebt our future generations. Because if debt becomes unsustainable, then we have a big problem. So we think a debt to GDP which is stabilizing at around 56%. It is not the number. There's no target. We've been saying it for many, many years so far that we don't have a target, but we get worried when the debt to GDP increases, but we are comfortable when it stabilizes at a number. The number that is stabilizing at now is around 56, and we are fine. And as you can see, towards the outer years, it obviously reduces, and we have to do everything in our power to make sure that that number is as low as possible. Because, as I say, we don't want to indebt future generations. Now, the slide 17 gives you now the full picture in terms of how the consolidated fiscal framework is like. And the important number is that one that I was talking about, the budget balance, where it's 4.3% revised estimate in 17-18. In 18-19, it will be minus 3.6, reducing to about minus 3.5% of GDP. And this main budget, as I said, I mean, you know, basically it includes, so that you compare eggs with eggs and not confuse them with something else, that this main budget as well includes the main budget as well as spending by provinces, public entities, and social security funds financed from their own revenue. That's important to note because sometimes, depending as to what number you're looking at, you may get a picture that may be distorted. Now, slide 18 is the slide that I was talking about, that post-school education and training is the fastest growing at 13.7%. Is it okay? Is it not okay? I think it's something else that we need to look at. But I think the story behind that number is that if you invest in education, if you invest in basic education and further education training, obviously that can only augur well for a growing economy like ours. The challenge, however, remains that what you're spending money on, especially at basic education level, should be, as you can see, that 6.8%. What we're spending money should be able to fit into nicely into post-school education and training, so that those numbers complement each other. Debt service cost is, again, a cost that we're worried about. That debt to GDP ratio that I said we're worried about has got direct impact in terms of this. If your debt service costs were small, we're spending about 200 billion. What, you know?
Yeah,
160 billion per year on servicing debt. Now imagine if we have to unlock that 160 billion and other social programs addressing, so it is important that we contain that debt. And that's why our interest is that black line, that it's as low as possible. We want to be able to borrow for investment and not borrow for consumption. That's the line that I think came out clear in the minister's speech yesterday.
Can you wrap up in the next 8 minutes that we allow enough time for
Thank you, Chair.
deliberation?
Division of revenue, that slide number 19, basically, you know, is a slide that is familiar, or we're very familiar with. The key is the percentages below there. National continues to be taking the biggest chunk in terms of the division of revenue, 47.7%, 43.3% for provinces, and 9% for local government. Now, public sector investments, infrastructure investments. Now, we are showing you what we are doing in terms of a percentage spent on public sector infrastructure spending as a percentage of GDP. We're going to almost spend 800 billion over the MTF in terms of delivery of public sector infrastructure. And these investments are mostly in energy, transport, and logistics, water and sanitation. And SOCs, as we all know, remain the largest contributors, accounting for almost 368 billion over the MTF. Now, we will continue. I've said this, that's important. Efficiency in the completion of the expenditure is important. What we spend in in infrastructure should be and has to be able to give us the necessary economic spin-offs that we need. And that's why we focused ourselves in this establishment of this budget facility for infrastructure. It's in operation now for almost 2 years. Last year we indicated to you that we are just setting it up. Now it is in operation. It assessed the first you know, plus 60 plus projects on the 30th of 31st of August, and we are happy that, you know, we've reviewed 38 large projects, and we are happy that this is the right way to go. What is worrying and what we said is a concern is state-owned companies and their financial position. It is unacceptable that we bail out, and we took a tip from one of the youngsters who normally sends tips to the minister. I forgot his name, but we recognized what he's saying yesterday, where he said, we cannot continue to bail out inefficiency in the state-owned companies and bailouts, etc. That's the view that I think we all agree, and it's important that we improve governance and the liquidity constraints that are there, and I did spend a little bit of time earlier on talking about it. Now, there are risks to the fiscus. They will remain there. It is important that we should acknowledge that the economic growth is not yet broad-based. There's no way. It has to be inclusive. We have to come up with radical measures that improve the structure of the economy in a way that we should. And this budget is obviously pointing us in that direction and actually calling us to rally around such a call to actually improve the lives of many, and which is important. We also note that there's public service wage negotiations that are in progress, and we hope they will only recognize the state of our economy and actually take that into account as the discussions are ongoing. We note the decisive action that we took in ESCOM to avoid them, a near-term default in the near future was a good move, and we want to do that with all other state-owned companies that has governance challenges and don't have a choice but to do that. And we also will ensure that as we roll out this free education that we all are rallying behind, that we ensure that it becomes, we do it in a very sustainable moving forward. It will remain critical for us to ensure that we avoid any downgrade because of the impact that any downgrade we have. And also there's also an issue about the road accident fund, which obviously, and broadly the social security funds, which are a risk to us. So, Chair, that's the story that we are putting through to you. All we are saying is that it's important that we recognize that we had tough choices to make. It was hard. It was a very hard budget to put together, especially with all the economic challenges that we had around low growth, a call on improving spending, and which we could not get out of in a way that we had. So we had to provide, including a debt situation that was unsustainable. So we think we have addressed, we think we did what we had to do, and with the excellent colleagues in the Treasury, maybe I must just say, Chair, on behalf of them, say to them, they did a splendid good job. Without them, and we would not have. In particular, Ian came and replaced Michael Sachs, whom the committee knows very well. He joined Gauteng and continued to serve government in a different capacity. And then we support what he's doing there. But Ian had to fill in quickly the shoes right at the end of the process. But as DDG Budget Office. So he did a wonderful job, and obviously with the guidance of the two political principals. They pushed us very hard, and we pushed ourselves hard. And thank you very much. Thanks.
Minister, done. We appreciate the expertise in the National Treasury. When you walk into the building of National Treasury in Pretoria, you feel the gravitas. You feel it. And we experience it when we get there. So thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. The Secretariat just bring to the table the written apologies. I'm not going to call out the names, just bring it to us that it is part of the meeting and that it will be captured in the minutes. We're going now into the question time. I want to kick off and start on the 13th of July 2017 when the Minister made a press release regarding government's inclusive growth action plan, referring to a couple of matters where we can hear what is the report back, because it was referred to as well during the MTBBS. Co-Chair, you want to take over? No. Right, let's start. Please to the point. We've got an hour, just over an hour. Let we be very productive. Let's take number one. You must now help me.
Thank you,
Remember your numbers. Now we're first taking the number one, number two, okay, number three, number four, right? Number five, Kabasa. 6 is Lees. 7, from the Peace. 8, 9, Mr. Honorable Swart. Our members from the legislators, please, you can, I'm begging you to engage. Honorable Motara is number 10. We covered? 11. And yourself. Before we go there, members, I sensitize you to look at page 107 to 119 in the budget review document. That is the response by the Honourable Minister and the Treasury to our recommendations in our reports that we tabled at the end of the MTBBS process. That is a reply from the Minister. Can we start here?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to ask many questions in the first round. I'll ask only 2 questions. But first, let me start by saying, Minister, this was the most difficult budgeting process ever. Well done to you and your team for the hard work to do trade-offs in a very difficult environment. And I need to make this comment up front because the nation will want you to explain to them in relation to the issue of value-added tax. I know for a fact there's no government that will want to, Chair, to go to VAT as a means of raising revenue. This was the most difficult decision I think you had to take. But the most important part of it that you said yesterday, it's on the zero rating. I went public also to consult views of people, what do they think about what needs to happen in relation to zero rating. And I need to share this feedback with you. One chap called Muteo Khwaripe, who's an analyst in one of our TV stations, made a suggestion as I was asking, how do you think government should implement this zero rating? He said we need to have a system, if it's possible, that SASSA cards can be utilized as a form of a token to ensure that people are able to get zero-rated products. So I'm putting it to you, Minister, whether is it going to be possible for National Treasury to work with the Department of Social Development to ensure that those who are on social grants are able to have direct benefit using their SASSA cards to, and I'm hopefully, Muteo Khwaripe will be happy that I've asked this question on his behalf directly in this meeting. Secondly, DG, in relation to quantifying the percentage term of the personal income tax, can you give us how it has contributed to the revenue shortfall? Because it will juxtapose why the need to impose VAT by giving scientific facts about how it contributed to the shortfall. In this case, I'm talking about the personal income tax. And the second question, which will be the last one in this round, I'm interested to know how will the VAT regulations in relation to the, foreign businesses, especially those who are in the digital technologies, be put across to ensure that we are able to achieve what we said we will achieve as the Minister made his speech yesterday. So, Chair, this is my first questions. I'll come back for others at a later stage. Thank you very much.
Excellent. 3 minutes per member for questions. Honourable Tablan.
Chairperson, thank you. I want to start by saying that I agree that, you know, obviously Treasury started in a very tight spot. My concern is, though, that, you know, even stabilizing 22-23 at 56.2%, that is not a very good position to be in terms of your fiscal position. That is just a remark. Secondly, Chair, I want to say that that I don't think this budget can be regarded as a poor-friendly budget, in the sense that the impact, you know, the 1% VAT increase, the 52 cents per litre on the fuel, you know, the total implication, especially on the poor, you know, I heard that people are saying the implication is about 7%, you know, in total, if you take the total implication of that. You know, and then mention was made about, you know, the grants that got raised. But, you know, going forward to October, a 10 rand increase in what people are getting, you can't even buy a loaf of bread for that. And really, are we busy with what? You know, the additional increase that people are going to get. Then my main concern, Chairperson, is, you know, the implication for the provinces. As far as the provinces are concerned, the cuts, was mainly on, your conditional grants. Now, conditional grants is meant for capital expenditure, and obviously that is going to have a profound implication on service delivery in the provinces. I mean, they need to build clinics, schools, stuff like that. That is the first thing. So service delivery is going to be impacted severely. Secondly, if you start cutting on capital works, obviously in terms of financial growth, to grow your economy, that is also going to be bad. Even, the slide that is indicated here in terms of capital expenditure, the trend is downwards. So, Chairperson, I want to say I am not very optimistic about this. Maybe this is the best that could have been done under the circumstances. But yes, that is just some concerns that I want to raise at this stage, Chairperson. Thank you.
Honourable members, on the 31st of March 2017, 9 provincial treasuries returned 4.4 billion rand back to the treasury. When we deal with the Division of Revenue bill briefing on the 20th of March, we'll engage on that one as too. So just keep that in mind. Number 3.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a few questions of clarity, if I may, please. On slide 7, this indicates that although we speak of shortfalls, it's actually we over-expected. Our estimations are too high. I'd like to know, how did it happen that our targets are so disproportionately high that we don't manage to meet them? On slide number 10, this amount, the gross tax revenue after tax proposals, is that based on a 1% GDP growth expectation or a 1.5% GDP growth expectation? Slide 12. We speak about an above inflation increases in social grants, but if you set off that against the VAT increase and the current CPI rate at about 4.5%, it doesn't really amount to much because CPI is going to be 72 Rand, so 90 Rand is 18 Rand more than that. And then if you take off 14 Rand, which is the extra 1% VAT on that amount, it leaves you with a 4 Rand increase. Maybe you could just comment on that because it seems like very little. On the same slide, we have now an estate duty that's going to be 25% for 30 million Rand and above. I just wanted to know, is that a net 30 million? And is this now official that if you have 30 million Rand or more, you are regarded as wealthy? Slide 13. When I look at the local government proportion of reductions, it's not in relation to the percentage that local government gets. Local government is the place where most citizens have their most dealings with government and where government expects most of the services to be delivered to the citizens. They're already struggling, municipalities, that is, with 9% of the total. Now they have to give the largest portion of the reductions. In the current year, it amounts to 11.95%, and over the medium term, 16.18% of the reductions come from local government. It seems disproportionate. Can you give an explanation as to why you're wanting to punish municipalities who after all have to do most of the job? Slide 15. You made a statement, sir, that you said we had to maintain spending when those two lines crossed on the graph in 2009. Can you say why you had to sustain spending? Why couldn't we have stopped the spending then and stopped the rot before it started? Slide 16. In 2012, we had a debt to GDP ratio of 38%. And at that stage, we were told if it got beyond 40%, we'd be in trouble. We've just happily adjusted that year after year going forward. And now we're sitting over 50%. This surely must be of great concern. And we're only talking about, oh, well, sometime in the future we will stabilize it. We have to do something about this. As you said, that 180 billion that we're spending at the moment is already too much, way too much on debt servicing costs. And that doesn't reduce the debt, that just maintains it where it is. We need to do something drastic about this. And I would appeal that when you look at this again, please bear that in mind. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Chair.
In December, the Honourable Minister of Finance tabled a report on municipalities, and captured in the report is an underspending of 53.1 billion rand. Just bear that in mind, because this fits into this whole picture. Number 4.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think we all welcome the improved macroeconomic picture, and I think we also welcome, in terms of the medium-term budget policy, that did not have a timeline set for debt stabilization. We now have a timeline set. My question is with regards to this timeline. Is it not possible that it could be done sooner and faster and better? Because clearly it's been indicated that it's one of the major non-productive costs that we have, debt servicing costs. And if we look now that higher education, free higher education, has taken over in terms of the faster growing item on the expenditure for the budget, and debt servicing costs. Secondly, my question would actually like to be, to indicate, what is the balancing priority in terms of debt servicing costs as opposed to the allocation of free basic higher education? And then the big concern, Chairperson, is if debt stabilization is going to be over the longer term, is it going to be on the back of taxation? And then also the concerns, of course, as my colleagues indicated with regards to the poorest of the poor, the increase in the VAT, and also then indicated also that the equitable share allocations of a reduction of 4.7 billion will also impact on the poor, because this is used to subsidize the services to the poor in terms of sometimes direct payments to the bulk supply, and it will put the bulk supply of basic services to the poor in jeopardy. That would be my questions. If I can have a second bite of the apple very quickly with regards to the private sector participation in state-owned entities. We've seen a loan from the PIC to Eskom, and we will see loans from the IDC and Development Bank to state-owned entities. But we see then that this is then loans then becoming equitable investments in equity, and that is not real privatization. What plans do you have in terms of real privatization, meaningful privatization, especially for Eskom? And what would the position be on the loan from the PIC to Eskom? Will it be a loan, and what is the terms and conditions of that loan? And is there a vision that this will become an equity investment, which will be good for Eskom, but not so good for the pensioners? Thank you.
Number 5.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. On the SOEs, I just want to find out, Minister and Deputy Minister, whether there is a process of implementing or revisiting the Presidential Review Commission recommendations on the state-owned companies. That speaks to possible rationalization and or phasing out those SOCs that have outlived their time, so that as you manage the situation obtaining at the moment with the state-owned companies, you also address these issues in an attempt to make them really play their or carry out their mandate as expressed in the NDP. Secondly, we appreciate the rising spending on education, especially fee-free post-school education and training, especially at the level of TVET colleges. However, is there some discussion between yourselves and the relevant authorities in these institutions around the relevant curriculum, especially TVET college curriculum, that should speak to the skills that are required in the economy. At the moment, it is a known fact that TVET colleges offer all sorts of qualifications, some of which are not really technical skills required in the economy. With the result that students who come out of the TVET colleges sometimes find it difficult to find jobs. But that also would be linked to how they link up with the companies for experience and so on. Is there a plan to deal with that question? I raise this because government can't just fund something whose outcomes you don't influence, especially in terms of quality and throughput. Lastly, on infrastructure, how are you planning to address the issue of leakages, especially two forms of leakages? Expatriation of South African money, if you like. Leakages in the form of imports of inputs that are readily available in the country. And secondly, I'm certain you are aware there is a whole lot of foreign companies who are registering themselves in South Africa, lining up themselves for the infrastructure projects in the country, with the result that the South African construction companies might be undermined, destroyed, and the money goes out of the country. How are you going to be dealing with that? Let me stop at that and again express and commend the Minister and Deputy Minister and the Department for navigating through a very difficult situation and presenting a very credible budget. Thank you.
Number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to see the Deputy Minister's back. I thought perhaps he'd done a run on us and was wanting to avoid my questions, but it's nice to see you, Sfiso. DG, and I'm quite interested to know how you know the price of a Bentley. Does that mean that you're either looking at one or perhaps have recently bought one?
Well, you Google it on your phone, that's easy.
I'm glad he's smiling, Mr. Chairman. He knows my sense of humor. The question of the debt to GDP ratio has been talked about a lot from both sides, but that ratio really is dependent on the growth rate that is predicted. And your growth rate is much higher than it was in October, and you've given reasons why you think it is, but it's also much higher than the IMF one that you have in the presentation. What is the basis, other than for a nice feeling, for pushing it up? And I see Chris and Ian are whispering to each other there. They're going to give me a good reply. Then to get on to the VAT increase, this is the first since 1993, so we're not used to the how it works. The implementation date is the 1st of April. How exactly is that going to be implemented in law? Is it part of the Rates and Monetary Amounts Bill, or is there some other instrument that will activate it beforehand? Because it's not like PIT where you can adjust if Parliament decides not to go this route. You can adjust later in the year before the end of the tax year. You can't, once you've charged someone 15%, find that customer to give them back their 1% VAT that now has not been approved by Parliament. So just the technicalities there. DG, I mean, you've identified risks. Sorry, let me go, I'll start somewhere else. On your slide 13, there's a reduction in payment to public entities. Where is that a reduction? How exactly what is that reduction? I mean, presumably the payment to SAA of 4.7 billion is included somewhere in this budget. yeah, so what are those reductions there? And then I think you've kind of answered my question about the 6 billion for drought relief and other. So is any of that money going to be made available for the city of Cape Town to deal with the water crisis?
Can I account for the 40 million first?
Order.
Yeah, Thandi, I'd love to. Where did you spend it?
No, don't let me engage with members individually here.
I shan't.
Put your question.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Thandi needs to know that I'm not chairing this meeting, so she can't behave when I'm not chairing the way she normally does. And can I propose that, Charles, you chair both the Finance Committee on this side and the other side, because nobody listens to me.
Mr. Chairman, I shall behave myself like I don't usually with the Finance Chair. So yeah, just some clarity whether we, that sort of is part of the 6 billion. I mean, I don't think anyone can doubt the importance of the changes to the board and management at SAA and Eskom. But I was a little bit disturbed to be contacted last night at about 11 o'clock about SAA cancelling all their freight services because the aircraft are technically not allowed to fly. They've been grounded or something. And then the minister tabled in Parliament this morning a request for the annual report, I think, Minister, to be delayed until the 30th of April, which is not a good sign. I would have thought that board would have had time to at least look at the reporting side. I mean, obviously they're not technicians and can't go and make sure that the nuts and bolts of aircraft are right. Just in terms of the risks, I started talking about it. What is the situation at the moment with regard to the talks on public service wages? Where are we in terms of what's being asked for? How big is that risk? And in your list of risks, you don't list the SOE risks, the Eskom risk, the Denel risk, the SAPO risk, the PRASA risk. I don't think. Ian's now looking quickly. You'll probably point out to me that it is there somewhere. If it is there, point it out to me, and what is the extent of those risks? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Lees. Number 7.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm the most behaved one of the finance, so you have no problems with me.
Order. Can you please pose your question?
No, Chair, thanks. I just want to understand insofar as what I call now the triple challenge, which is going to be confronting South Africans insofar as VAT is concerned, with that increase, the increase in the fuel levy, and then of course compounded by the drought. Because all those three are obviously going to have an impact. There's not much we can do about the drought, hoping for a heavenly intervention there. But the VAT and the levy, and I go to this point here that, of course, there's a 0 rating on certain items. Is it possible that that list can be expanded to cover further items to sort of cushion the challenges which are going to confront? I think it's got 19 items now, it could be more. And then, because, Chair, one of the things is that we seek to think that the poor people are only confined to maize and mealies, and that their expenditure must be 0 rated there, and that other things, well, they will find their way. So can we, if we can just look at reviewing that list and seeing the possibilities of navigating its expansion. The Minister, in his opening statement, spoke about the budget being a response to the SONA in the main. And I'm trying to understand Treasury's position insofar as what the President so emphatically spoke about, expropriation of land without compensation. Because yesterday the Minister made reference to 4.2 billion rands being set aside for acquisition of land. So I'm trying to understand Treasury's position insofar as this new outlook that is being presented of expropriation of land without compensation. Chair, I must say, SASA, of course, is a big problem, and we've had to deal with it at length. Now, and I'm not certain how we can in good faith say, no, on the 1st of April, there'll be no problems, when a huge chunk of the budget is going to be going into social grants, and whether Treasury so far is satisfied with the progress that has been made in the transition from SASA and the post office, which in itself needs to be looked at, because I believe that we cannot just willy-nilly expect the magic wand to sort out the problem without serious action steps, because that is going to be a big problem. Finally, Chair, Honor, but Matebula will know that we've been dealing at Scopa with deviations and expansions becoming a norm as opposed to an exception, and whether will Treasury now, as the Minister spoke about this yesterday as well, institute some sort of strengthened guidelines to deal with that, because you've got entities like Transnet who are abusing expansions and deviations, creating imagined emergencies and so on, and whether that is going to be strengthened as well to ensure that even the internal controls at Treasury assist us in this regard. Chair, finally, then of course there's the drought. No, I'll come back to the drought. I wanna,
You've got half a minute.
As part of cutting the fat, has Treasury engaged with international relations on the rationalization process of foreign missions, given that South Africa's got the second highest number of foreign missions, and that is a huge cost to the fiscus? Thanks, Chair.
Comrade Peace.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Honorable Minister, I want to really applaud you, but I still have reservations. I want to make a proposal. If you can factor that in, definitely I'll be the first one to support your budget. Hmm?
No.
Okay.
Please put your question.
For me, I think the hike on petrol, the 1% increase of VAT, coupled with the sugar tax and other increases, will definitely affect the life of a poor, of the poor, in particularly a poor girl child. DG, the poor doesn't only live on meal, maize and paraffin. Oh, the smell of paraffin. The issue, Honorable Minister, that I thought will form part of your budget, which is also a contentious issue, like the Feast Must Fall campaign, is the sanitary pads. Since 2016, Treasury made a promise so that the pads will be tax exempt. I'm surprised 2 years down the line, the minister is not saying anything. I personally feel that the needs of women has been neglected. So if the minister can also give us an update on that issue, and if possible, relook at the issue and make sure that the sanitary pads are tax exempt. I also wanted to talk about the incapacity of government departments to spend their budget, but you've said there will be a meeting in March to address that. So I'll wait for that meeting. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Number 9, Honorable Swart.
Thank you, Chairs. Thank you, Minister. And just from our side also, well done. A time of hope, a new era, a tough budget. Hope springs eternal in the human breast, as we know. So we are grateful for the savings. It's been a tough budget. Just on the VAT issue, we are a bit concerned about that, and I just want to join my colleagues in asking you, is it possible to look at the list, whether one can add to that list? Then we see the deficit for next year, 18-19, the next financial year, dropping to 3.6%, and again, one hopes that it will, from 4.3%. If you, however, look at the risks that are set out on page 21, there are 3 scenarios which do indicate the Moody's downgrade, state-owned companies, and the third scenario is the more positive scenario, which an increase in business confidence, higher economic growth. Could the DG or Minister give us an indication of, it's difficult to be prophetic almost, but how significant are these risks? One hopes that economic growth will improve. But to me, the second scenario, and I'm pleased that you met with the ratings agencies, but the second scenario of the SOEs is, as we know, a very significant risk. And on that score, as you know, I've been very involved in the Eskom inquiry, and it's been absolutely, it's been shocking to see the revelations that we've found there. And we are welcome the steps to address SOEs and Eskom in particular with the new board. But Minister, maybe you can assist us a little bit in that regard. The Government Shareholder Management Bill, which is a direct result of the Presidential Review Committee report on SOEs. Now that aims to set a legislative framework for all the SOCs and how they will function, what the roles of the boards, the executives. And it's not under your domain directly, it's under public enterprises, but maybe you could give us an indication of the progress with that bill that will go a long way to streamline the different SOEs in line with the Companies Act and the PFMA Act. Then I'd like to just also ask, in view of the fact that the rand has strengthened quite significantly, that obviously has had a positive impact on debt repayments where we've got foreign denominated debt. And can you, DG, you might not have the figures now, but give us an indication of the savings that have been achieved and that are envisaged to be achieved with a stronger currency. Then the last issue briefly relates to the quite substantive issues relating to drought, not only in the Western Cape, throughout the country. And on page 79, there's quite a large issue relating there as to how to assist with drought provisions. One of the concerns that has come across my path is that certain canals are not being maintained in various areas, including the Western Cape. And where you have rain and the canals are not being maintained, obviously the rain flows into the sea. And I understand that even in the Western Cape, there are canals that are not being maintained, and it's an indication that the money will only be available in June. The rains come now in March. And again, it's anecdotal. I can provide further evidence if necessary, but this is an issue which is a major concern. So maybe we can just comment on that and how the reduction on capital expenditure impacts that. I welcome the 26 billion, which is a saving for this year, but it is, as my colleagues have mentioned, a bit of a concern that some of it relates to capital expenditure on page 53, where we reduced in large programs, including incarceration. Now, as you know, I'm on the Justice and Prisons Committee. Does that also mean that some of the correctional services plans and proposed prisons are going to be reduced? Thank you, Chairperson, from my side.
Thank you, Honourable Swart. Number 10.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Chairperson, let me also just congratulate the Minister and his team. I think under the circumstances, it's as best as it can get. Definitely forewarned is forearmed, and we were warned in the MTBBS process about the difficult decisions that would have to be made, and here they are. I think some of the situation that was presented to us in the MTBBS is not is likely not going to change in the very near future. So the difficult decisions will have to continue to be made. And some of them will have to be for the long term, really. And those, I suppose, we'll have to expect other difficult decisions, and that's what we're going to see in the future. For me, I just want to raise probably 3 critical issues for me. The one is our tax collection institutions, and that's ours. And that whatever whether it's the inquiry or commission that is now being set up, finalize its work as soon as possible, so that whatever findings come out of that process, we put South Africans at ease in terms of the strength of the institution, so that we don't strengthen or deepen the risk or the threat or the narrative that's in South Africa of tax immorality. And you've even spoken about it yourself, DG, I think on page 7, about tax morality, but compliance and administration. Because I think it's easy to buy into that if it is a sentiment across the country. And the institution that is responsible for tax administration needs to be as clean as possible. The second issue is around the SOEs. I think it's good to start at governance. It's a good start to sort out governance issues, but the reality is that many of the SOEs' challenges are not limited to governance issues. And some of them are some of the issues are structural within a particular SOE, and each SOE would have to be looked at individually on its merit. For instance, some of the decisions that we took around SAA years ago were not capitalized. Those decisions were not capitalized. And those problems of the indebtedness will continue. There's also other decisions that we took at a particular time which were unnecessary and now are finding their way in the budget in the form of guarantees. So I think the decisions that we make are important because they put our SOEs in a particular position financially and also in terms of governance. Also another issue around within the SOEs are the high salaries and the bonuses. It's a huge cost to us, while SOEs have got difficult financial statuses on their own. And then the third critical issue that I'd like to raise is the issue around policy certainty. I want to be extreme when I use the example and say that there are countries that are in conflict, but there are businesses that operate in those countries. And the reason is that there is certainty around how the business will operate, regardless of their own conflict issues that are internal within the country. And unless we clearly put forward our policy positions, make decisions and stick to them, you're not going to have businesses that will invest or want to operate in a situation where they're not sure whether in the next 6 months they're still going to operate, or the next year they're still going to operate under the same circumstances. A prime example would probably be the bill that we were busy processing on the Provident Fund and pension funds, the separation of those. The industry, which is in the insurance industry, went through an extensive process of preparing the business and the industry for those changes. And at the end of the process of the processing of the legislation, when we withdrew the legislation, that money and capital that was put into the industry to prepare the industry for the changes in Provident Fund and pension funds, it was no longer being rolled out, and businesses the industry was really upset. And from their point of view, you can understand it, that you put in capital, you put in, you invest for something that government is preparing for, and then at the 11th hour, government then retracts. So I think policy certainty is going to help in going a long way to provide investment, because the investment really is going to come in the main from the private sector. Thanks, Chair.
To add to that question, that you also, Minister and Team Treasury, reflect on the Special Voluntary Disclosure Program. What is the outcome? Well, you didn't address that in your presentation, but in the budget review, you referred to 3 billion rand. Honorable Posa and then Honorable Karim.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Minister, Deputy Minister, and your team, I really would like to add my voice in congratulating you for the balanced budget, but also the fact that it also resonates with the President's SONA address. Indeed, this has got the potential of having a positive impact moving forward with our radical economic transformation, because people can see that there's teamwork and there's alignment of thinking, and I think that will assist in, in fast-tracking the programs that would bring a turnaround in our economy, so that we can have the spin-off of your reduction of unemployment and also poverty and the inequality. But also, Minister, I would also like to congratulate National Treasury for South Africa being ranked first on the 2017 Open Budget Index. Yes. Indeed, you are doing well for us, and we want to thank you for that. Also, your initiative on the National Treasury partnership with civil society, where you developed a budget data portal. Now, to me, because this is a new concept, I think it would be necessary that there is an awareness program so that people are aware, but also this should be followed by training so that we can be able to make use of this training of the MPs with immediate effect, but also of the parliamentary staff. We really would like to make full use of these. These are the innovations that I think will assist us to take our economy to new heights. Yes, on the SOEs, Honorable Minister, you mentioned that indeed there is a process in place to intervene on the evergreen contracts. Now, what I would like to know is, do you have a plan? Because indeed we need to tap into this area for all those new entrants into the economy, but also, is there anything that you think as Parliament we can do to assist in this area of work? Because I think it's urgent. We need to go in here as soon as possible. Also, in your speech, you mentioned that the costs associated with the fee-free education and training are uncertain. I just want you to elaborate a bit there so that we have a clearer understanding or insight on what exactly you were referring to here. But also, you made a recommendation that there should be an alignment of the department's plan with, with the allocation. There, I would also want to just make a proposal that maybe this assignment should not be left to the department. It should also involve your DPME, FFC, and National Treasury, so that this alignment is done with immediate effect, because there is, here, to me, there's urgency for implementation, and so that we don't lag behind in terms of that actual implementation. And then, right, on page 8 of the budget speech, Honorable Minister, you mentioned the CEO initiative, which committed about 1.4 billion to support high potential SMMEs. Now, I would like to tap from your wisdom on when and how do you think this allocation will be used for immediate benefit by the SMMEs? Because it's something else to have this, but where we are, there's desperation that the SMMEs should benefit from it. So if you could at least elaborate on that one, and whether there is a criteria, because then we need, for instance, when you go out there, this is the information that we should share with the beneficiaries, so that they know exactly there's a criteria, and this is the criteria, and then they can then come and tap from this resource. Can I do the last one? All right, the last one then would be In respect of the 3.8 billion allocated to the school's infrastructure backlogs grant to replace 82 inappropriate schools, our experience is that, and I'm sure you will also bear witness to this, there has been a serious expenditure on the ASIDI. But then here, you then refer to this. It is indeed a good program with good objectives, but indeed the performance is questionable. So are there any specific steps or measures put in place to improve the performance of the school infrastructure backlogs grants? Because money is there, but under expenditure means that that money has not been used for the purpose for which it was budgeted for. Last one, reviving township economy is a good idea, and it is part of the radical economic transformation program. So as township economy has not been fully exploited, what plans are put in place to give support to small startup businesses from townships? I don't know if I'm asking this question to the relevant person, but I'm sure you can have an influence to make sure that indeed we do entrench ourselves in the townships and ensure that the townships are not affected by an unfair competition posed by big retailers such as your Pick and Pay, ShopRite, and Spar. That would be my take. Thanks.
Thank you. Honorable Karim.
Thank you. Firstly, I think I want to echo what others say, that, you know, you had a minister, you and your team, a very unenviable task. These were tough times, and it required a tough budget. I think most of us will agree that we had no choice but to have a tough budget. But what the committee might want to look at is whether you had no choice in the choices you made to make up a tough budget. Now, this is something I think we should suspend, actually, any decisions on, because we'll hear from the public. We'll hear, of course, from the PBO on Tuesday and FFC, and then on Wednesday there'll be public hearings. Obviously, like many others here, it's the VAT that most preoccupies us. Now, we understand that, look, you know, it could have been 2%, it's 1%, that there's been attempts to cushion the effects of it by above CPI social grants, that the lower income earners will get higher rebates, all of which will help. And of course, as you've been saying, Minister, repeatedly, I saw you on TV this morning and heard you, that look, we also, and you put it very well here too, but in a nutshell, you're basically saying, if I understand this, that look, you know, yes, there's VAT increases, but a lot of that money is going into fee-free higher education, and many of the people that will benefit from that would be poor and low-income earners, all of which, at least to me, seems credible, right? But I think maybe because what we have here is not just a VAT increase, but in addition, a fuel levy and a whole lot of other things that together make it a very challenging, strenuous budget for the poor and disadvantaged. The thing that I wanted to know, and I asked this question to the PBO, yes, we accept your statistics, right, DG, that by other standards of other developing countries, 14% is not unduly high, and now even 15% isn't necessarily so. And a lot of countries are moving towards VAT as against other forms of taxes. But we're a country of acute income inequalities, one of the worst in the world, we are told. So in a context like this, is that comparative statistics useful at all? We also accept the arguments you've used about, you know, luxury goods that upper classes and middle classes buy a higher customs duty and so on. But at the same time, the question that arises on zero rating, you know, I also raised the same question Mr. Lees did to one of your officials just now. When does it come into effect, knowing that it very probably comes into effect, the VAT, on the 1st? And this is an issue Parliament needs to address, because there are times when we have to say that there are things that must be handled in ways that allow Parliament to have a bigger say, because the public has a bigger say if Parliament has a bigger say. But for now, we are here with this 1% increase. Now, isn't it possible for Treasury to already begin, if people disagree, they can say so now, begin to look at being more selective about what items are zero rated? For example, fruit, right? I mean, I'm not sure that working classes and poorer income earners or low income earners buy kiwi fruit, for example, right? Or when it comes to vegetables, how many buy broccoli? Who benefits from it? Members of Parliament, ministers, deputy ministers, and the upper classes. So when we have this bland fruit exemption or bland vegetable exemption, can't we be more selective about it? Can't we have we're going to ask you, as we must, as committees, what impact studies have you done about the effect of a 1% increase? Of course, there's going to be vigorous opposition to it, Minister, as you know. So we will have to have next week Friday, when you reply as Treasury, very clear views on why we had no choice but to increase VAT by 1% against other possibilities. But I'll leave it for now. We're running out of time. There's a lot more to say, and really it's not fair to other members if the chair speaks for more than we should. So I'll stop right now, except to say that there is one thing, though, Minister, that we really must welcome. This budget facility infrastructure thing. And perhaps you must deal with that next week. We really want to know how it will work. And we really support that, right? As much as we're dismayed that 47% of the 85 billion that we're going to save is on infrastructure. There's a lot of things one could say. This is only to remind members, finally, from my side, and I won't utter another word, I promise, just to remind people about process. We have public hearings on Wednesday. The National Treasury replies, and then the public's given an opportunity to reply to National Treasury, then National Treasury replies. So we'll have a better sense after next Friday where to go. Yeah. Thank you.
That's very important, the process forward. Honourable members, we must now be very realistic. There's 44 questions that has been tabled. And I'm informed there's a plenary in the National Assembly by the whip. So immediately, Honourable Minister, you and your team can start replying. At a breakfast session in December in Nasrec, I watched that one. You mentioned the whole matter of coordination in government. Policy implementation and coordination. I know we are now pressed for time, but if you can...
They say they've removed plenary from the pink paper.
Oh.
It was on the pink paper, now we hear it's been removed.
Oh, but it's still in the parliamentary program. Here it is. I received it last night. But fine. Thank you, Honourable Minister, DG, Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Chair. Minister was just saying something. I'm not going to repeat. Now, Chair, I'm not alone. We've got colleagues from the South African Revenue Service here.
Well, I can see you're not alone, that Frans Tomaszek is sitting there. Yeah. He's doing oversight over you.
And Momo is here, Mampo, Dr. Mudise is here, Ian, Chris Axelson from Tech Side, so, and the CPO acting, Mary Jane from local government and province. So we are quite, in fact, the issues are more generally, and colleagues have written what they have to, and there are 44 questions I also noted, Chair. But I think the general point, comments that we're taking in terms of what members are saying, I think it's important that as we approach the implementation part of the budget, as we also come back to reply, we should take into account some of the comments that were made around you know, for instance, if you look at slide 12 and slide 15, as Honourable McCracken said earlier, you know, there was an issue as to why did you, for instance, maintain slide 15, for instance, we could not cut salaries. We can't reduce salaries. We can't reduce grants. It was at that point, at that era, when the child support grant, for instance, was being accelerated from what it was, 11, 13, 15, 18. So it is those type of expenditures that we became accustomed to spending high. We became accustomed to actually increasing essentially what was your equitable share you know, because we had lots of money. So, but we note the point, the point that you're making. I'm going to ask Ian to deal with all fiscal policy related questions and the framework around the debt. You know, why did we choose? And Momo and team can take the tech stuff in their entirety. Yeah, maybe let's start there with Ian, with you. And Marijeng, you can also talk about, Mampo will talk about the cuts and the reductions and et cetera. Maybe start with the fiscal framework stuff.
Okay, thank you, DG. Thank you, chairs. I'm going to touch on just a few key fiscal matters that have been mentioned. I think the first is to say that we are well aware that this is a very tough budget. We try to be as transparent as we can in the documents. We say quite bluntly in this presentation, for example, that a VAT increase does mean that all households pay more than they would have without the tax increase. We do say that these expenditure cuts and reprioritizations are large, and they will have implications in some cases for service delivery, and may in some cases result in the delay of infrastructure projects. So I want to be clear that, you know, we are not in any way shying away from these facts. And the reason why we've done these major changes is because we believe that the alternative is worse. The alternative is the empty BPS baseline of debt continuing to eat up a larger and larger share of our non-interest spending, debt increasing, further downgrades, possible financial crisis or fiscal crisis. And that scenario, without doubt, would be worse for the economy, worse for the poor, worse for jobs, than a scenario in which we stabilize the public finances and put the economy on a better path. Now, in other words, we are saying we are introducing major and difficult decisions now because the alternative would be worse, and we want to build space for a much improved medium to long-term growth outlook. And it seems to us that over time, the fiscal story, which has always been an absolute pillar of South Africa's institutional strength, has come under increasing pressure. I mean, when investors look at South Africa, when decisions are made to invest, two of the pillars have been a strong, a stable, and an independent reserve bank, and a clear and transparent and well-run fiscal institution with strong public finances, and that has been coming under pressure. So this budget is to say that we are serious again about getting the public finances on track and ensuring that over time there's more space for higher investment, stronger growth, and a generally improved growth outlook. Which brings me to the second point, which is, you know, what do we make of the fact that the IMF is projecting lower GDP growth than we are? The IMF is projecting lower GDP growth, but we have been in discussions with them. I contacted them about this. I mean, one of the issues is that the World Economic Outlook is a big document. It doesn't take into account very short-term changes, which we've had in South Africa very recently, political changes and others. If you look more generally at what the other forecasters are saying, they also have quite an improvement over time. Our view is certainly 2019, 2020, we're very much in line with others, including other very credible institutions, the BER and others. So our view is, yes, we've taken a positive view on what the economic outlook is like. We feel we are broadly in line with other credible institutions, and we think there's good reason to have an improved growth outlook as described by the DG, and we anticipate, for example, the IMF and others to revise up their growth outlooks in the near future. Now, the question also is, should we not have done more to stabilize debt even more quickly or start to bring it down? If we wanted to, I mean, what the graph is effectively saying, and the dynamics of debt are such that obviously what the decisions you make now are reflected next year in your stock of debt. And what the graph is showing at the moment is that the really major decisions start to kick in from next year onwards, 18, 19, and almost immediately from 19, 20 onwards, the debt trajectory improves dramatically. So in a sense, I mean, to change this would have meant very large additional fiscal consolidation measures in the current year and again in 18, 19, which again, we think we've done a lot to stabilize the public finances. And this is a reasonable, credible time frame to get the debt to GDP ratio back on track. Maybe to add that there is actually some upside risk as well. We're not entirely sure about how this improvement in confidence, how this improvement in bond yields and so on is going to feed through. We do have, as has already been mentioned, one higher GDP outlook scenario. And there is, in our view, a possibility that we might be looking at slightly improved numbers, revenue and debt to GDP numbers over the medium term. Having said that, the risks are very large, and it's true that I see now SOCs are not on that list at the end of the presentation, but we did dedicate the previous slide just to looking at the financial position of state-owned companies. They remain a very large risk. The way we think about it, broadly speaking, is that the interventions we've done now on governance and boards and so forth are what was required to stabilize state-owned companies in the immediate term, near term. But there remains a fundamental question about the long-run sustainability, and certainly part of that discussion will be around the structures, the funding, and the operational plans of these institutions looking over the next 10 years. There was a question about, a couple of questions about the grants and the linkages between the grants increase and inflation. Certainly we don't want to overplay this intervention because, as has been pointed out, but the logic behind it really was to say, and this applies to the budget in general, was if we're going to go with a VAT increase, what are the implications? One of the implications, of course, is that inflation would be higher, most likely be higher than it would have been without a VAT increase. So if you look at, for example, what the Reserve Bank has been projecting, estimating for inflation, it's below 5%. We're saying with a VAT increase, it's probably going to be around 5.5%, and the grants both take that into account and a little bit additional. But certainly, we don't want to suggest that it's a very major intervention. I'm trying to see if there are any more. I think that's enough on the fiscal story for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Tobias?
A follow-up on the issue of the performance of the bonds. Does it suggest that probably it can go to the 100 basis points? I'm saying, does it suggest in terms of the performance of the South African bonds, do we have a situation where we can go to 100 basis points? Is that
100 basis points lower than the pre-budget estimate? I'm not sure. I mean, I would want to put that to my ALM colleagues. But certainly, we've seen a major improvement in the government bond yield, and we've seen a strengthening of the rand. And perhaps just to mention that, at least to a certain extent, a stronger economic outlook with a stronger rand is likely to put downward pressure on inflation. So
can SAB maybe respond to it? Because I think they're better placed to tell us exactly if it's possible. Because we don't know as you just estimating it.
Right, continue with your response, please.
Okay, Chair, let me deal with some of the tax issues. And as we do so, I think we're just giving what we published yesterday, just the rates bill, because that's this, Chair. It's the instrument, as you know, with tax bills, we publish them as draft bills, it's not formally tabled, and it kicks off the process for the hearings and so on. So you'll find that all the urgent changes in the bills, if to give it effect, we have to do it through this bill. But before that, though, the current tax laws, we amended it, what, a year or 2 years ago, where when we increase PIT, personal income tax, or VAT, now, it takes effect for a period of 12 months and has to be confirmed by this legislation. So that's just a legal process that I'm just outlining. So if, for example, if you look at page section 8 on this bill, it's the place where the tax moves from 14 to 15%. Okay. If we deal with any zero-rated items, either way, there's a schedule in the in a VAT Act that we'll have to amend. Okay. So just want to outline the technicalities of how the change is done. And it's important to do so because even for ourselves, we've never done so in the VAT. So we're just explaining what the legal instruments are to effect whatever change and what can take effect either immediately and what, and just in terms of when an act takes, the tax laws take effect, there are some announcements as the minister speaks. That's why when the minister delivered the budget speech yesterday, he says, I tabled the budget review, which includes... No.
Order.
When he started, he said he tabled certain documents, the budget speech, the budget review, which he says including something on customs. And the law is that takes those customs issues, like the sin taxes, they take effect immediately, okay? Other things like the personal income tax, the changes of the brackets will take effect from the start of the tax year, so that is 1st of March. Other provisions tend to take effect, they link to the fiscal year or later, and they take effect, like the VAT will take effect on the 1st of April. Okay, so I just thought to spell out the facts. Chair, I think the DG in his presentation, and certainly the Minister as well, outlined, I think, just the hard choices facing us to get that revenue. That if you really want to get revenue on a scale of 36 billion rands, you had to do one of the 3 big taxes, which make up over 80% of our tax revenue. So personal income tax, corporate income tax, or VAT. We've shown how there's really very limited capacity to increase corporate income tax. The pressure there is to go down, and it impacts on our competitiveness. Personal income tax, we've had recent increases, and the difficulties we've had in collecting the amounts that we had projected has been the constraint that's been placed. So here, obviously, we increase, the minister announced the increase in the VAT. I can blame the minister. I'm joking, but it was all on our advice. Let me be clear. So we strongly associate with what the minister did. I think as officials, it's obviously we were looking at all these alternatives, firstly from a technical perspective, and Chair, every year we plead to the committee, to the chair of the Standing Committee on Finance, Mr. Karim, and Chair to yourself, that we need to come and explain the tax proposals in more detail, because obviously you have the Division of Revenue bill, so someone comes and talks through that bill. You have the appropriation bill, in a sense, people talk through that. But it's just as important, I think, to go through the tax proposals where we can really present in much more detail. So yes, we have done several studies on VAT. Surprisingly, the studies show that, contrary to what people believe, it's not so naturally regressive as people are saying. It's actually, there are some studies which say it's mildly, taking into account all the zero rating and exemptions, that it's mildly regressive or mildly progressive, in fact. We have a World Bank study and so on. So what we'll do is that there are different studies, depends on the assumptions, but we will come and present and make them available. They have been presented. Some of them are already on our website as papers, but we will certainly talk through, because it's not correct to say that we didn't think of the impact on the poor. In fact, that was very central to what we were thinking. And of course, the horrible fact is, if you increase any tax, it's going to have an impact on people. They are going to pay more. Obviously, the issue is who's going to pay the most. So delivering any tax increase does mean that on the margin, people are paying more. And Chair, I just want to correct an impression, because it's also out there in the media. It's not, some people have said it's a 7% increase. Yes, it's a 7% increase if you say on 14%, 1% over 14% gives you just over 7%. But the increase in price is less than 1%. It's 0.87%, something like that. Because it's, if an article costs 100 rands, you would have paid 114 rands once you impose 14% VAT. Now you'll be paying 115 rand. So you're paying 1 rand over 114 rand more, just to get the amount right. In terms of the zero-rated items that members have asked, there are, Chris, how many? 19 items. If you go into in the budget review, Chair, there's on page 124, you have the tax expenditure estimates. And whilst these are obviously reflect the tax that we did not receive because there's exemptions, whilst it's for the year 2015-16, because the info comes with a lag, you will see that the 19 basic food items are estimated to have foregone revenue of about 22.7 billion rands. Okay. Over and above that, there's also petrol, diesel, and paraffin. There's a whole range of exemptions. So there's 19 zero-rated items, and zero-rate means that basically people can, the end person can still claim on inputs on VAT, as opposed to when it's tax exempt. So over and above the 19 items, and we can provide the list, you have exemptions around education, public transport. But if you look at the list of the 19, they include milk, eggs, samp, brown bread, dried mealies, dried beans, lentils, pilchards, milk powder, dairy powder blend, fruit, vegetable oil, vegetables, rice, milk, and eggs, so legumes. So, Chair, I think the point that's been made that to the extent that what's in a basket of the poor, obviously if we have better information, we can say, look, fruit is being eaten mainly by upper income people. There may be better mechanisms to reach poorer communities, perhaps say through the school nutrition program you can give fruit, because unfortunately it appears that poor, low income, in that market, people don't buy as much fruit as we would like them to buy. So most of the benefit goes to people higher up in the income chain. So obviously the Treasury is open to looking at this. There's no universal knowledge about what should be in, what should be out. But to the extent that we include new items, I think we'd rather, can we replace current items which are not as well targeted. So, but we will come and we will go through and provide a much more detailed presentation. I think there's issues that have come up like sanitary pads. You know, as a man, it's very dangerous for me to talk about those issues. I've never been slaughtered in front, in fact, in this very room, okay, where I had to answer for all the sins of men, okay. So, but fortunately in our tax team, we have some very militant women who will also say the issue of targeting against comes up. We did not promise that we would make sanitary pads tax exempt. I think the issue was there's a whole process that's been led by the Department of Women. They've come, I think, to Parliament as well. And part of the suggestions is how do you ensure that poorer communities have access to sanitary pads? Can you target schools, etc.? So, you know, we can obviously ask that committee to also come in. But as I said, when we look at VAT in its entirety, sometimes you get very perverse outcomes. But let us present when we do it in much more detail. I think just in terms of what are the other big questions on tax that I missed out? Do you want to just comment? And France is also here.
There were just, thank you, Momo, thank you, chairs. There were just a couple points on the PIT shortfall as a proportion of the total. So the PIT shortfall looks to be about 21.1 billion out of the 50. So it's almost 40.
The chairs complain, and now they're the ones who are making me to miss this important point.
Well, members, this meeting is scheduled to adjourn at 3 o'clock. So we need your cooperation that the Trade Minister and the team can reply to your questions. So I plead for you for your cooperation. Thank you.
Which members might want to think about. It's a bit unfair to pose 1,000 questions to them and expect them to reply in detail. So what I suggest, if the meeting agrees now, if the co-chairs agrees, it's the majority must decide, that the outstanding questions can be given to us in writing. Our researchers are recording it. Moreover, you're coming next week. Remember? You'll be here at 9:30 next Friday, where you can give full explanations. But if the majority say no, I'm cool with that.
Agreed, Chair.
Proceed. Agreed. Thank you. Proceed.
Okay, so I must continue. Okay, so quickly, so the PIT shortfall was about over 40% of the current shortfall, so we didn't get anywhere near as much revenues on that. On the electronic services, the proposal, I think you were just asking about it, was we were trying to expand electronic services that should be paying VAT. So platforms as a service, so if you get a taxi but through an app, you must pay VAT on that service. So we're expanding that. The revenue targets, why were they so optimistic last year? Well, last year, at the time of the budget, we didn't realize we were in the middle of a recession, so a lot of the revenue hasn't come forward just because the economy was doing a lot worse than we thought at that time. There were also some revenue items that were shifted to the previous year. So the dividend tax was 5.5 billion that went into the previous year and then wasn't in this year due to the change. Those are some of the reasons. We can go into that when we get the final number. The revenue growth rates are based on the new economic growth estimates that we've made. We've included the tax proposals in those economic growth estimates, so those they should already take into account the impact of the tax change on the economy. And I think that was all. Thanks.
Just move on to, so away from tax, just on the CESA grants and the hybrid model, that's work in progress. I think the Constitutional Court monitors it and so on. So the idea is through that process, you will get beneficiaries to be able to access their grants through whatever financial institution of their choice. But it's still work in progress. It's early for us to, I think, really comment. There's still things that are going on that we, in terms of the detail, because it does require quite a lot of planning just to effect the transition. And the question is whether that can be done by 1st of April or not. Those are before the Constitutional Court, or the report's been given to the Constitutional Court, which monitors it every month. Thank you.
Chair, I'll give Mr. Moyane, just before he comes in, one, Honorable Liz is correct. I mean, the aircraft that you're talking about is grounded, but it's a part, it's a tail, it's a faulty tail, and we're waiting for that part. Not we, SAA is waiting for that part from the US. It should be coming soon. Thank you.
It's coming from Seattle. It's a Boeing 737-400. Yeah.
Chair, ours will be to respond to two issues, the SVDP, as well as the transference of South African money out of the country. It speaks to illicit financial flows. Dr. Landa will speak to that very quickly.
Thanks, Chair. On the issue of the SVDP, we are happy to report that we are dealing more extensively with the offshore wealth of taxpayers, as highlighted in the Panama and more recently the Paradise Papers. We've received close to 2,000 applications. We have processed just short of 900, and we have concluded on 850 of that. We have already banked 2 billion, and we have agreed to 2.6 billion, so we're confident that by the end of this financial year, we'll be realizing 3 billion from that process. Of course, it's ongoing. The 3 billion is just from those processes that we've been concluded so far. As you know, some of these are quite difficult cases. With regards to illicit flows of funds, quickly, as we are tightening up together with Reserve Bank on tracking flow of funds out of the country and reconciling that with customs transactions, we are noticing, first of all, increasingly smuggling of cash. And the latest project that is worrying most tax administration is the blockchain technology, the movement of cryptocurrency through blockchain technology. So we are talking to our international counterparts, and we are also talking to Reserve Bank, and soon there will be guidance for taxpayers being issued on that. I think we'll provide a more comprehensive report on that particular matter going forward, but just to give some flow or some idea about what we are doing with regards to the newest trends on illicit flows of funds.
Thank you, DG. Through you, Chair, can I be allowed just to summarize how we did the process of the cards? I think it will give a good idea to the members on a number of issues that they raise. So the first thing that we did was to reduce the administration budget for all national and provincial departments by 2%. We also reduced the transfers to public entities who receive 500 million or less by 2.5%. And most of those public entities, some of them have surpluses, so it was slightly easier for them to absorb the cuts. For the public entities that were finding it difficult to absorb the cut, the main department that is responsible for that entity tried to assist in one way or another to help them absorb the cut. For local government, we protected the equitable share because we understand that most of the small local governments won't survive with the cuts. The only thing that we reduced, and it's in the budget, would be the conditional grants, especially the infrastructure grants that are firstly not performing, and secondly, where we allocated much more money to them, we just reallocated or readjusted their spending so that they grow in line with other grants. So that's how we reduce those. The other thing that we did as well was to look at the big public entities that had major surpluses, and a good example of those would have been the SANRAL, where they had 4 billion of a surplus. We reduced that, and also PRASA. We protected most of the social spending, such as health, education, social grants. Those were protected, and there were no reductions in those particular spending. We had lots of engagements with the departments, and the main thing that we all agreed with the department was that they need to implement better spending controls. They have to manage their headcount, especially when looking at administration budgets, and also with the public entities, they have to start utilizing the surpluses that they have so that they can deal with the cut but also contribute to growth. With the issue of DECO, there is a process of rationalizing their foreign missions, and they've already started reducing the locally hired people into those missions. But it's going to be a process that they need to follow to make sure that they don't utilize or crowd out funds to missions rather than other spending projects that they have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members. Just one thing from my side. I'm sure Mazamban was waiting for this one about the 5 billion rand from PIC to ESCOM. A simple answer is that PIC has got a mandate from GPF as to where and how they can invest and lend money. So the transaction between PIC and ESCOM was purely on commercial terms, and their returns on that investment, they do play in the money market. So there's no grant it is within the mandate of the PIC, so there are no pension funds which perhaps are being jeopardized by that process. I can tell you as to exactly what would have happened if PIC didn't intervene, but I think the main thing from the PIC side is that it had nothing to do with National Treasury. They decided to get involved in the that commercial to get involved with each other on commercial terms. I just thought let me explain that one, but thank you very much for your indulgence.
Minister?
Thank you. All the difficult questions having been answered, it's safe now to deal with the easier questions. I think the other questions that were asked, we welcome the opportunity to provide written responses to them so that we can elaborate on them. I will comment on just 3 issues. Maybe let me confine myself to 2, because the 3rd issue falls under the broad topic on SOC reforms. In that regard, the President, I think, outlined a very extensive process in his reply to the SONA debate, that he is going to re-establish the SOC Coordinating Council and chair it himself. And the SOC Coordinating Council is going to focus on clarifying the shareholder governance management, streamline the architecture of our state-owned companies because we had approved the view that we need to establish a centralized shareholder governance model along the lines either of Temasek in Singapore or SABC in China, which would assist us in better managing and governing our state-owned companies. Then the President also announced, we therefore expect that the shareholder governance management bill will be brought to Parliament this year. He then went on to announce that he is going to convene a meeting with the chairs, the CEOs and CFOs of state-owned companies to discuss with them their commercial and developmental mandates. At the center of what the SOC Coordinating Council must do is not only to deal with the architecture of state-owned companies, but address the structural problems that face actually all our state-owned companies. To ensure, above everything else, that they are commercially and financially viable. You do need to embark on a massive restructuring of state-owned companies I think the Deputy Minister earlier was outlining, in another meeting, was outlining how such a restructuring and bringing on board of the private sector would assist to share the risks, to share the debt burden, to share the responsibility to capitalize the state-owned companies, to share the responsibility to make them financially viable. So this process is going to go a long way towards outlining that and ensuring that moving forward, these state-owned companies, particularly looking at the big infrastructure-related ones, Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, Sanral, and even South African Airways, are financially viable by crowding in private sector investments and expertise in the form of skills. The second issue that I want to raise, there was an argument earlier that because of the introduction of VAT, the budget is therefore not poor-friendly. To the contrary, it actually is. It addresses itself very firmly. And perhaps the mistake we make is one of presuming that to stabilize the debt by cutting expenditure and raising revenues is anti-poor. That a ballooning debt that is not stabilizing is pro-poor. An argument that seems to suggest that to spend now and pay later is pro-poor. It actually is not. I tried to outline in summary, perhaps that was because we didn't have time, we were trying to get through the presentation, that what would be the risk of creating a debt that we say we will pay later? Unfortunately, the result would not only be that this debt will be inherited by future generations, they will actually inherit far worse. Because sitting as we are right now, we would be downgraded. And so what we would give to future generations is not only a debt, we would hand over to them a country whose economy is in dire straits. So we need to make the decisions, as I was saying, now that are going to assist the poor, because a downgrade today would affect the poor very severely. That's why we made the statement last year that it's wrong to say it's fine for us to be downgraded because the poor already live in junk. We said that argument is fundamentally flawed. Any downgrade by Moody's now would affect the poor most severely. The rising cost of capital, the flight of capital from the country, the inability of government to borrow money from the markets and state-owned companies. They will need to cut down on infrastructure budgets, and therefore the employment we expect to arise from that. And if we need to continue and stimulate growth in the economy, we would need to go. The only other place where we can borrow money when the financial markets, the bond markets say to us, we won't give you any money because you are such a huge risk, you have a debt you can't pay. The only place we will have to go to is the IMF, and believe you me, that is not pro-poor. So we ought not to be populist in the choices that we make, because the results, the outcomes of that populist budgeting would be felt the worst by the poor and of course by the rest of South Africans. And so the choices that we have faced, the attempts we have tried, they may not be the best, but under the conditions in which we are, these are the best decisions we could take. But what have we done in the budget that favors the poor? So it's, I mean, most immediately, it's the social income, the injection of 2.6 billion rand on social income, the higher education decision. You know, when you come to think of it, a poor person who would have to think whether I buy bread and milk and maize or save for my child's education at university and decide that my child is hungry now, I must buy the bread, and for university or TVET education, we will see when the future comes, doesn't have to worry about that any longer. Government has taken that responsibility from this poor person and placed it on itself. And therefore, the options have become a little bit lighter for this poor person. All I'm saying is that the budget must not be viewed in terms of its individual items, but it must be viewed in totality. Everything put together, the decisions on SMMEs, 200 billion rand investment in economic items, all of those decisions actually assist to address the concerns of the poor. The decisions we have taken, I mean, over the last few weeks, we have seen an acceleration of decisions that bring about the structural reforms in the economy that we've been talking about for years. And one of those immediate decisions that are positive is the decision on mining that is going to unlock investments in the mining sector. So I think I emphasize to spend now and pay later, populist budgeting, and to view the budget in terms of single items rather than in totality in relation to one another is what we should avoid. And so we should view the budget in totality and ensure and pay very close attention to how, even as it proposes difficult choices that must be made, but all those decisions serve to advance the interests of the poor first and foremost, and the people of South Africa in general. Thank you.
Deputy Minister, you're fine. Honourable Minister, thank you. Thank you for Team Treasury for your reply. The rest you can put on paper. We'll again meet you next Friday when you respond to the inputs that's going to be made at the public hearings. Honourable members, we are working with taxpayers' money, and that's what we have to account to. When we go back to our constituencies, you're going to get questions on this budget, and this will assist you to reply. But the main thing is to be honest, to be very honest. The second thing is the whole question about accountability. Now it comes to us as members of parliament, as members of a select or portfolio committee. How do you do your oversight in your committee? What do you zoom into? How do you do it outside? The whole process of accountability, the fingers point to us as well. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the questions. This meeting is adjourned. We see each other next Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock in the OAC. Thank you.